Hello and welcome to the monthly Northwood University Alumni and Friends webinar. My name is Julia Damchek, and I'm pleased to welcome all of you today. Excited to welcome back Dr. Timothy G. Nash, and he has also brought Jason Hayes with him today, and they are going to talk about grading the grid, the National Energy Report Card. Most of you should already know that Dr. Nash is a VP Emeritus from Northwood University, currently the director of the Northwood McNair Center for Advancement of Free Enterprise. Jason is the director of environmental policy for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. He's also an adjunct professor with Northwood. He spent the past 3 decades focused on energy and environmental policy. So we welcome them both here with us today. Before we get to our presentation, however, I'd like to remind everyone that we will have time for Q&A at the end of their presentation. So just remember to type in your questions, and I will moderate those questions at the end of their presentation. We're also recording the webinar today, and we will email this out to you after maybe this afternoon or tomorrow, so you can have that recording on hand if you want to share that or rewatch. And we'll also send some additional supplemental materials from Dr. Nash and Jason. So without any further ado, Dr. Nash, I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you, Julie. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to be with you again this month, 2 months in a row. I'm not sure you should be subjected to that, but it is my honor to be here, and especially my honor to be here with my good friend Jason Hayes. For those of you that don't know, there's a real strong connection between Northwood and the Mackinac Center. Not only is Jason an adjunct faculty here, but some of you may remember taking a class with Larry Reed, who was one of my professors at Northwood as well. And Larry is the person that started the Mackinac Center many, many years ago here in Midland. And if you haven't been back to Midland in a long time, it's the old SS Kresge building. It's a beautiful center. You ought to come over to campus and see the McNair Center, and then go downtown and see the Mackinac Center. But the Mackinac Center is one of this country's top state-based think tanks. And we are honored for the first time to be doing a major project together. And the lead for Mackinac is Jason, and for Northwood, for McNair, it's yours truly. This is a topic that's been on our minds, the two of us, and a lot of other environmentalists and economists, because we're very interested in what it's going to take to have a strong, vital, and secure energy future, not just for the United States, but for the world. And so we had a long conversation and decided that the two organizations would work together and develop the economics and science behind grading the grid. In other words, are we going to have a sustainable grid? Are we putting too much emphasis on one form of energy or source of energy versus another? Is wind and solar ready for prime time? Are coal and natural gas and oil as bad as some people say? Can there be a renaissance of nuclear energy? And so what we did was we took a look at all of the 8 major areas or sources of energy generation, graded them, and then looked at the U.S. grid. I'm very honored to say that Jason will be leading the release of a couple of other studies, more specifically on the Michigan grid and the Midwest grid. But you're going to see our scorecard. We grade from A to F, all 8 major sources of energy in the United States. And then we have some concerns we'll voice at the end or during Q&A, but it is my honor to turn the program over to, in my opinion, one of the top environmental thinkers, energy thinkers in the country, my friend Jason Hayes. Jason.
All right, thank you, Tim. Definitely an honor to work with Tim on papers like this. This is the second paper that we've done together, Mackinac and McNair. That we did a previous one that looked just specifically at natural gas, but this paper, like Tim said, picked up 8 major energy sources. And so we looked at natural gas, coal, petroleum, nuclear, hydroelectric, wind, solar, and geothermal. And so we then graded each one of those on a 5-part metric and said, what is the capacity of these energy sources? Can they produce sufficient energy to meet the demand, like especially our growing demand with, the transition to electric vehicles and to data centers and AI and that sort of thing? What's the chance that these energy sources can actually provide sufficient energy or meet that reliability standard that we have? Then we also looked at environmental impact and human impact. So environmental impact seems pretty obvious. What are the impacts of using or developing, preparing the constituent parts of these different energy sources? So what are their environmental impacts? And then also, good, I see the report cards up. What are the human impacts? We often overlook some of these issues, like in China for the development of rare earth minerals that are used in the magnets that go into wind turbines, and also the magnets that go into other renewable sources. But the batteries that are produced use things like cobalt. They come from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So when we're developing those different sources in these different locations, there are some issues with child labor. There are issues with what they call forced labor, or basically enslaving entire populations to produce these components of these different generation sources and the actual generation sources. So that's typically related to wind and solar, but we went through those as well. So then we looked at cost, just simply asked, how much does it cost to operate these energy sources, and how do they compete with other energy sources in terms of pricing? We looked at technology and innovation. What technologies are used to power these or to operate these generation sources? And then what new technologies are being developed? And then our last section was market feasibility. We looked at the different energy sources, to what extent we tried to answer they rely on free market forces to supply the energy to the public, or to what extent do they rely on government aid, mandates, subsidies, that sort of thing. So we took all of those together and created this report card that you see on your screen. And so the one that came out on top from our ranking was natural gas. It came out as an A, because in each one of these things, natural gas had quite a bit of capacity. It was a very reliable fuel. It was one of the key reasons why we have been able to reduce the environmental impacts. For a lot of people are concerned about climate change. So CO2 emissions, we looked at them, and natural gas, literally switching from older 1950s, 1960s era technology that we used to run coal plants, switching to newer 2024, 2020 era technology. We've been building new natural gas turbines and that sort of thing that's much cleaner. And by fuel switching from coal to gas, we've been able to reduce our CO2 emissions by as much as 15 to 17% from the 2005 emission levels. So natural gas did very well in terms of environmental impact and human impact. It's a domestically produced resource, so we don't have to worry about things like, enslaved Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region of China. In terms of cost, natural gas is one of our cheapest energy sources, so it did very well there. For technology and innovation, we are constantly coming up with new ways to produce gas, whether it's through fracking or that type of thing. And also new ways to use gas more efficiently, combined cycle technologies and those sorts of things. And then market feasibility, gas is one of the few energy sources that actually competes in free market terms. It gets some of the lowest levels of government aid or mandate or subsidies, and competes despite the fact that we're seeing increasing restrictions on its use, the ability to build pipelines and those sorts of things. Gas still comes out as one of our cheapest sources. In second place, we had nuclear. Very similar reasons for that. It came away with a B+. Nuclear had, it's obviously one of our most reliable energy sources. It's completely reliable. It runs 24/7, 365 without hiccups. It also is extremely clean, has very low environmental impacts. In terms of cost, once it's built, when it's up and running, it's very cost efficient. It's one of our least expensive types of electricity to use. For technology and innovation, it's actually, as Tim suggested, experiencing a bit of a renaissance, because new technologies are coming out, like small modular nukes, breeder reactors, and a lot of these sorts of things. So we wrote about that and explained how nuclear is really leading in terms of innovation. And then market feasibility was the one area where we graded it a little bit lower, because to build nuclear is still very expensive. And the key reasons for that expense really is related to regulatory pressure against the industry. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has oversight of the permitting of new nuclear plants. That's really the one area where nuclear, in our grading, our ranking or metric, really kind of lowered its ranking there. So rather than going through every single energy source, what I'll do is I'll look at those two that came in first, A and B minus, and the two that were at the bottom of the ranking, wind and solar. And both wind and solar received Fs in our rankings because of many of those reasons that I explained to you were kind of flipped. So a lot of people will, they'll look at it and they'll say, well, wind and solar, shouldn't they have been much higher because they're green and affordable and all those sorts of things? But when it came to capacity and reliability, both wind and solar suffer from what's known as intermittency. Even wind and solar's biggest proponents recognize that they are what they call reliably unreliable. So that was from a New York Times defense of wind, that during the Winter Storm Uri blackouts in Texas, one of its biggest proponents actually used that term: wind and solar are reliably unreliable. In terms of environmental impact, people will often just focus myopically only on CO2 emissions, and they will forget that we are having to increase the mining for the metals and the minerals to produce both wind and solar. They also have other environmental impacts, like some of the chemicals that go into making solar, where arsenic, selenium, lead, and those sorts of things. If those chemicals were coming from something like coal ash, then coal would be ranked its ranking would go way down because of concerns over environmental impacts. So what we said is, if we're going to apply those types of metrics to coal and coal ash and fossil fuels and nuclear, then we should apply those same metrics to wind and solar. And in that case, wind and solar both came away with lower rankings. Wind and solar both have other impacts in terms of the environment. They use a lot of land, and they also have other impacts in terms of what are we going to do with them when they're done. They have very short life cycles, like between 10 to 20 years, when you compare them to a coal plant, which is 50 to 60 years, and a nuclear plant, which will run, even in some cases as many as 100 years. So their life cycles require that you're reproducing them constantly. So the notion that they are, in quotes, renewable is actually incorrect. So that was in terms of environmental impact. In terms of human impact, I already discussed some of the issues with the enslavement of the Uyghur Muslim minority in the Xinjiang region of China. They are directly linked to the production of solar panels and solar components. The issue that I noted with cobalt being produced in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is also related to the use of battery backup for wind and solar, and we wrote about that. So that in terms of cost, people will often hear that wind and solar are, the price is dropping rapidly, and it's really some of the most competitive forms of electricity. But when you look at broad picture, not just what it takes to produce electricity from wind and solar, right in the wind turbine or the solar panel, what we're finding is that they rely very heavily on federal government subsidies and state level mandates. So without those mandates, we have examples of investors like Warren Buffett saying a few years ago that without the tax credit, you would not build wind and solar. It doesn't make sense to build them without the tax credit. So again, they rely very heavily on government mandates or subsidies. And then in terms of technology, the subsidies actually play into this, because the way that the subsidies for wind and solar are set up, they're called the production tax credit or the investment tax credit. Both of those tax credits encourage the current technology of wind and solar to be built. So they just say, build more of them and operate those technologies. In comparison, other subsidies that go to different forms of energy, whether it's fossil fuels or nuclear, tend to support new research into developing better and newer technologies, more efficient technologies. So those subsidies for wind and solar actually kind of pull back and say, just focus on what we have more than developing new and better. The last one was market feasibility based on all of the things that I just discussed, the subsidies, the land use and all the environmental impacts and the costs and that sort of thing. The market feasibility for wind and solar, we said, while they are being mandated, there's no strong market demand for them in the sense of, like, again, going back to that Warren Buffett quote, if you're not getting the tax credits, there's no reason to build them. So there isn't a huge market feasibility for them. So what I'll do is, instead of just continuing on and going through every one, I'll stop and see if Tim has anything that he wants to add on to the report card section.
No, I think that Jason hit the key points. What I would add is that when you're looking at the overall cost, the real uniqueness of this study, and if you haven't had a chance to read it, you can download it from the McNair Center or from the Mackinac Center. It's 132 pages, very comprehensive. It includes its own greatest criticisms as well as the key points we're trying to make. And what we're really arguing is that, especially in a world where we have a almost $35 trillion US national debt and close to $5 trillion in total state debt, we can't afford to be taking a lot of government money to subsidize things that are not as effective or as efficient as they can be or they should be. So one of the points that I would make is that when you're looking at the grid, the thing that's most important is not to say that wind and solar doesn't have great promise. One of the points Jason made early in our research was that, is the market ready? As an example, wind and solar, a good idea in a number of applications. It's a great idea. Electric vehicles. We've got a paper coming out shortly on electric vehicles. It's not that electric vehicles are bad or wrong. The question is, what is the application that makes it successful? what's the scale, what's the scope. And so I would simply say that as you look at the grading system and you look at the 8 sources of energy, what would happen if it truly had to meet the market test? In other words, it had to stand on its own, like so many products that all of you listening that you produce, that you sell. Could the energy stand on its own and meet the market test? And I think part of our general analysis is that we're not saying anything negative about the idea of solar or the idea of wind, but is it ready, and is it ready in mass application?
Yeah, and on that issue, essentially wind and solar, they still need some work. That's essentially what Tim and I wrote in this paper. So one of the benefits of other fuels like natural gas, as Tim was speaking, it reminded me the intermittency that's associated with wind and solar. Like we've all heard, the wind does not blow 24/7 and the sun does not shine 24/7. So where natural gas really comes in and shines, to use the term again, and proves its value, is that the technologies we use to make electricity with natural gas allow us to, in effect, pair gas with wind and solar. Where the wind will come up and then it'll drop off, gas is able to ramp up very quickly and fill that gap. It does the same thing in the evening. When the sun goes down, solar obviously can't produce electricity without the sun shining. So when it's going down and producing less electricity, that's when gas appears on scene to really ramp up and fill that hole again. And then in the background, the always on form of electricity is nuclear, where nuclear is producing constantly 24/7 for 18 to 24 months at a time. And then they will turn off the reactor and do it deliberately to pull out the spent fuel and put in new fuel, and then they fire it back up and it runs for another 18 to 24 months. So in that sense, natural gas and nuclear make a good combination, because gas can always be ready to, go up when wind is going down or solar is going down. Gas can make up that difference quickly. And then we have other forms of technologies that's called combined cycle technologies, where natural gas is able to run as very similar to nuclear. It's called base load, the always on 24/7 energy supply that we need. That's where in the past we've used coal and that for that. Now that many of the energy policies that we're seeing put in place across North America and Europe, and that they're really heavily attacking coal. So in our ranking, we recognized coal, for example, in that, where policy is really pushing coal to the outskirts. We ranked coal lower in that sense. So natural gas is starting to come in with technologies like combined cycle to fill in that gap where coal had left off. So I'm not sure about our time. I don't want to keep chatting along here. I think we have a half hour. So Julie, if you want to do Q&A, I'm happy to answer questions, or I can keep explaining.
Sure. Yeah, we do have a half an hour. I will, remind everyone that Q&A is now open. So please type in your comments in the Q&A section. Should be at the bottom of your screen. Jason and Tim, you guys can certainly share any final comments right now. Usually takes a few seconds for those questions to load. So yeah, go ahead. Any final statements or comments before we have any questions?
I would just simply add 2 things. One, my greatest discovery in working with Jason, on the science side, is that again, when Jason made the point that here's the environmental science guy introducing to the economist a quote from Henry Ford, and that Henry Ford made the statement to a group of investors that in the end, the person that decides, or the group that decides whether the Ford Model T is successful or not, are his customers, number one.
Mhm.
And so the real question is, in many cases with a public utility, who are the customers? And it's not quite a pure customer driven market. But the other part, when you're applying Ford's logic, the real problem I see today is that the technology just isn't ready. So when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, what we're hoping is that we have great battery storage technology to be able to store massive amounts of electricity during downtimes. And again, a lot of the analysis shows that we just have not yet invented the battery technology, the storage technology to get the job done, and certainly at a cost that's very reasonable. We've spent trillions of dollars on a number of alternate energies, and we're not where we would like to be, would be point number one. Point two is that the other factor that I find very difficult today, as we were working on this paper, here we are, the world's producer of some of the, if not the cleanest oil, natural gas, and coal in the world, and we're shutting down. We're imagining this giant bubble over the world, and all the pollution goes up, and we're trying as a global society to reduce overall pollution. So we are shutting down American clean oil, American clean gas, American clean coal, and we're opening a new coal mine and a new coal-powered plant in China or in Russia, which much lower technology and much higher levels of carbon footprint on that coal or that oil or that natural gas. Also, some of the stuff coming out of Venezuela and South America. It just doesn't make any sense. We're curtailing American jobs, the American economy, tax revenue to the US, and we're allowing other countries to increase the global carbon footprint at the expense of the American economy. And I just have a real problem with that for a lot of different reasons. So again, as I started out, it's been an honor working with Jason on this paper. We got a lot of coverage, especially from Fox News, thanks to our communications department and that of the Mackinac Center. And I would encourage all of you to take a look at the study, and my email, Jason's, is readily available if you have any questions after the event. And then the other point I wanted to make, and turn it back over to Jason, is that there's a great organization we discovered called the Empowerment Alliance, and Julie's going to send all of you a link to their website, and you can sign up and get their afternoon tea. And they send out messages on energy and energy policy that I think, if this topic interests you, you ought to look at signing up for afternoon tea, TEA, the Empowerment Alliance. Jason, bring it home, buddy.
Yeah, I'll just key off of what Tim just said. We have in the opening sentences of the introduction of the paper a quote from, there's Dr. Lars Chernichow and Professor William Hayden Smith. They open chapter 5 of their book, The Unpopular Truth, with the following quote, that they say, electricity is to modern civilization what blood is to the human body. So we're at a point where if we no longer can trust our electricity system because of the intermittency associated with wind and solar and the mandated transition to net zero and that sort of thing, we impact our economy's ability to circulate its blood, which is electricity. So in the same way that would harm our body if we just stopped circulating our blood, electricity is to that economy the same sort of thing. We cannot afford to allow electricity to be shut down or unreliable in that sense. It's absolutely essential to us.
Thank you. We did have two questions come in. The first one was just making sure we gave them the document. So I did type in the link to your study on the McNair website, but we'll email that out as well with the recording. Second question, do you have further details on processing and delivery of these products?
Of the energy products?
Yes, I assume so.
Yeah, so we did go into some detail throughout the paper of like the different sources, whether it was gas, coal, petroleum, nuclear, any of those. Part of the discussion for each, basically the paper's broken down into these 8 sections. And we tried to get a pretty holistic view of what it takes to get the energy source from stage 1, whether it's the mining or the drilling or that sort of thing, all the way through to where it's producing electricity and we're using that in the grid. So if we missed something, I would welcome people, please download the paper, check it out. And if we didn't answer a question in the paper, let either Tim or I know and we'll work on that. There's always a version 2.0 that needs to come out of papers like this, and we could definitely add that.
Well, thank you to shrinking your study into just this quick 30-minute webinar. I know there's, like you said, a lot more information shared in the study itself. So I also encourage all of you to check that out. All right, I've got one more question. When looking at solar and wind, you have to look at how many units of energy it takes to create. 1 unit of uranium gives 80. 1 unit invested in solar energy only returns 4. That was I guess a statement from Michael Hebner.
Yep. Tim, do you want to start?
I'm following your lead, buddy.
Okay, in this one, that's absolutely correct. There's something that we discuss in the paper, and we also, like Tim said, we're producing, Mackinac Center's producing a few more papers here coming out in May and June. One looks at the stability of the Midwest grid, and one looks at the cost of net zero to the state of Michigan. We'll also discuss a bit of this in the upcoming paper that Mackinac and McNair are pairing on for electric vehicles. But in each one of these cases, and in the natural gas paper that we did last December, we discussed something that's called energy density. And there is no escaping the fact that nuclear is the most energy dense source of electricity that we have available to the human race. So wind and solar are very diffuse. They're ephemeral energy sources, and trying to capture those sources takes a lot of, like I said, a lot of land and a lot of material. And so what you end up doing is spreading out the energy that is developed over a much wider, again, material outlay and also land base and that sort of thing. So you're trying to capture all of these things, whereas some of our colleagues will kind of jokingly say, look, Mother Nature has already compacted all of these other, like the fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are just, stored solar power, really, when it comes down to it. And Mother Nature has already compacted them all into a nice, tight, energy dense source for us. And then at the very far end of what's the most energy dense option, nuclear is literally the thing that drives the entire solar system. Like our sun runs on that, compressed helium. Now that's fusion instead of fission, but we're operating in very similar area here. So there's no doubt that nuclear is the most energy dense, and for that reason, for human use, it's the most advanced, the most clean. It requires the least amount of material and that sort of thing. And so right behind it, we noted that natural gas is very similar, very energy dense when compared to wind or solar or any of those. And if we wanted to have a good, reliable option in terms of renewable, that's where hydroelectric came in. Hydro, we gave a B-, because hydro has that ability to, it's much more energy dense. It's easier to use. It's dispatchable. You can turn it on and off when you need it. And so wind and solar did not have that technology or that ability yet, as Tim noted.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up today. I want to thank Jason and Tim again for providing us with the facts on the energy grid. I'd also like to remind you all to just check your inboxes. We will be emailing the recording out along with these additional resources. Also take our survey if you don't mind. Take a few minutes and take the survey. We'd like to have your feedback on what sort of topics you'd like in the future. We will be taking June and July off for our webinar circuit. We're going to take a little summer break from the webinars, and we'll be back in August with our next webinar. So hope to see you online in August. But before then, I invite you all to attend the Northwood University President's Freedom Celebration on campus on June 6th. If you want more information, you can easily find that on the Northwood University website or reach out to me, Julia Damchek. We look forward to seeing lots of our alumni, friends, and donors on campus on June 6th to hear President Kent McDonald's State of the University address, along with our keynote speaker, best-selling author, Arthur Brooks. So we are excited for that event, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll see you soon.